my mind is blown with all the stats from yourselves and John. Got lots in my head. I'm really fascinated by, I think it probably was about 2/3 of people who are commuting now at least 3 days a week. I think that was it. And 8% poor souls who are doing more than 5 days, which I'm concerned about. That's not great living, that is. So anyway, it's not about my questions. It's about questions from our delegates today. So we've got around 15 minutes. So I'm going to try and make it quite rapid, get through them, succinct answers, obviously from both yourselves. So let's crack through. So first up, question from Chris Hyde. Thank you, Chris. What locations in the UK and elsewhere provide the best examples of how to achieve and deliver sustainable commuting? I think this came through, John, during your piece. So I'll say that one again. What locations in the UK and elsewhere provide the best examples of how to achieve and deliver sustainable commuting? John, any thoughts on that?
Again, it comes back to the whole issue of cars and parking availability. So, you look at what's happened in central London, you look at pictures of central London in the 1970s where cars parked all over the place. Same in Amsterdam. We have this view of the Netherlands always being a cycling hub, but it's not. It's once you remove those parking spaces, and then that allows public transport improvements and it allows people to cycle. But as Lizzie's presentation showed, in rural areas, you're never going to be able to achieve those sorts of changes. You're always going to get people driving, and then the question becomes, can you convert them to electric vehicles rather than trying to switch modes?
I think there's an interesting thing there about, when we talk about public transport, rural versus urban, I think it's always quite a difficult one to talk about rural public transport. I think we should be talking about rural transport and what are the best solutions for that. We sometimes forget that the car is part. Private and public transport work together. They're both serving the public, and how can we make that better work? I think with rural, that in particular. Okay, so maybe I'll come to you, Lizzie, first on this one. Tracy, thanks for your question. I concur with commuter stress. How do we get the government and employers to see how improving the commute to work would improve mental and physical health and therefore productivity? Big thing, growth. We want growth across the country.
Yeah, I guess there's lots of great research out there already on the use of travel time and making that productive and meaningful, and pointing to how, I don't mean making us all sit on our commute and work and squeeze every single minute out of the bus or the train journey, although some people like to do that, and I've probably done that myself sometimes. But productivity is derived from in different ways, isn't it? And as this person said in their question, the ability for the commute to be a positive thing, a positive part of the day where your mental and physical health can be improved. There's loads of room for emphasis on that and emphasizing how time can be spent usefully and productively and meaningly while people are traveling.
In your research, Lizzie, were you able to then slice and dice to actually see where the commuter stress is coming from? Is it coming from people driving, or is it not statistically significant across the piece?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult once you get down to low base sizes, and of course, when people commute, they're often not just using one type of transport, so it becomes tricky to disaggregate it. But I expect it wouldn't be an unreasonable assumption to make that some stress is coming from car journeys, given that people in the survey data mentioned traffic congestion, for example, and the state of the roads being among the top negative aspects of their commute. So we can make some inferences and deductions about those journeys, people thinking about the car journeys that they're making, basically.
Sure. Question here from Claire Byrne. Thank you, Claire. Is there any evidence that suggests that those who value freedom of choice generally in reality mean freedom to drive their own car? Is that something that's coming through in the research?
I think this is a really excellent question, because I think this is the assumption that is jumped to, and then very quickly the narrative becomes very binary about being able to drive your car or not being able to drive your car, and it's much more complex than that, isn't it? When we look at converting some journeys on some trips that are made to different modes, or perhaps not making some journeys when they're not necessary to make them. So, I mean, anecdotally, when we conduct qualitative research and engage with the public on issues, I think freedom to drive your own car comes through strongly, but just a car in general. But freedom in other senses, like freedom of when to travel, for example.
John, anything to add? I guess when you've been exploring and looking at, rail, tram, bus schemes and the like, how does that button up with that kind of, this is about freedom? Does that come through in terms of some of these projects that you're looking at, in terms of that backlash against, well, these products are kind of then against counter car?
You get some of that. I think the other issue you need to think about is freedom of choice often means freedom to do things other than drive your own car. So people complain they're forced to drive cars because, again, it's back to the suburbs and more rural areas. Your bus service stops at 6 o'clock in the evening, and if you're working evening shifts, what can you do? We were doing some work in a relatively deprived area. There were jobs locally. There were people who want those jobs, but if they haven't got a car, how do you get back from the pub when you're working in a hospitality job that finishes at 10, 11 o'clock at night? You walk down dark roads at that time of night. Do you want to do that? And so freedom of choice actually means freedom of being able to commute when those jobs require you to commute by whatever mode that is available, rather than forcing you to use a particular mode. And that sometimes people are forced to use cars, and people sometimes can't afford cars, or they are unable for various reasons to drive.
Yeah.
And I think in knowing about the different options, knowing that the choice is there is really important. It's as much about information and public understanding as it is about provision, because it's all very well having, great systems, but there is a role for employers in communicating that out, what's available locally to help you get to work. Ride sharing on an informal basis even will work really well in some areas, but you have to know about that, and you have to know something positive about it, and maybe hear testimonials to be convinced by it and want to take that up.
Yeah, I think that access to information is really important, and I think when we come on to later presentations, that will come through. I think in access, digital access, that whole ability to understand what is available to you, and therefore choices to perhaps use your own car less. Fantastic. So Kate Carpenter here. Thank you, Kate. In some countries, employers are responsible for the safety and cost of commute. Yeah, I know, like Belgium, for example, you can claim back for your cycle to work and all sorts of different things. Would that affect mode choice, do you think? I think this is coming into policy now, because obviously there's a limit perhaps to what employers can do, but I guess there's an underlying policy thing here as well. Maybe, John, to start.
So declare an interest here. So Kate is one of my colleagues at Jacobs, a leading safety expert. And when we were having this discussion about not commuting, but actually travel in the course of work, and it's a shocking statistic that a third of all fatalities on the road network are either somebody driving in the course of work or caused by, or a person traveling in the course of work being involved in those. So the question is, how far do as employers' responsibilities for safety come into it? And certain employers, for example, on the railways, they require their employees to live within a certain distance of their workplaces, because they recognize that actually, if you're tired, you've got a long drive into work and a long drive after you've been working, that is a safety issue, and therefore they restrict how far you live from the depots to reduce your travel times. And I think there is a question about the length of people's commutes. There are a large number of people who do commute very long distances indeed. After COVID, during COVID, we saw employers recruiting nationally, people working from home. So I know cases of people working or living in the Lake District and are effectively meant to be based in London. And then suddenly their employer demands they come into work once or twice a week. That is a huge both cost and a safety implication, that people are traveling long distances, especially if they're driving and they're tired. So I think it would have an impact on sort of long distance commuting. You know, whether it would affect people's choice of modes for more sort of general commuting, I think again, is more about parking provision. If you started charging people for their workplace parking, because it does cost employers money to provide that workplace parking, people often forget that, then that will obviously would have an impact on people's choice of modes.
I think on safety as well, I guess there's always an aspect of that which is just completely out of control from employers, and there's actual safety based on, we can look at accident incident statistics, and then there's perceived safety as well, and often that can be it comes up in qualitative research all the time. Feeling unsafe on public transport can be a really big barrier to using it. So for people who need to travel home from work at night when it's dark, and they've got to hang around a bus stop that doesn't feel very safe, or they get on the bus and there's antisocial behaviour, these things can be quite top of mind for some people as reasons why they don't travel, and it's quite difficult it's quite difficult to know what could impact that from an employer point of view. But the cost was the other aspect of the question, and certainly the survey data seems to suggest that people might be motivated by anything that could help them with cost and affordability of travel.
Yeah, I think cost, and then obviously associating that with cost of living. Employers can really help here in terms of incentives. So yes, we don't have a policy where the commute is paid for. I mean, obviously at Paris, I'm familiar that within the Ile-de-France area, employers pay for 50% of that train fare, and whether irrespective of whether the employee takes it or not, there's a contribution they make. But I think there's incentives that perhaps employers can lean on more to perhaps advance sustainable travel within their organisation. Got a couple more minutes, I believe, so we'll crack on with a couple more. A question here from Emil. Oh, hi, Emil. Lizzie, do preferred modes have an impact on how productive people found their commute?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it becomes tricky to unpick the data, even though it seems as though it shouldn't, because of base sizes, but also people who are bolting together different transport modes to make multi-stage journeys. I think it could be safe to assume that it would, and clearly there are things that you can do when you're traveling on public transport in particular that you can't do while you're driving or while you're cycling. So I think that's a really ripe area of opportunity for bringing a public discussion into focus about how the commute can be positive and how the time can be spent positively to lots of good ends that are not just about cheaper options maybe than driving, that are not just about exercise and mental health and well-being for active travel, because obviously that, as you said, John, that's for shorter journeys, that's not going to work for everyone, but what you can get from rail travel when that's working well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a complex beast here. The sort of the cost and productivity. I think there's also a part for the employer to play in terms of perhaps if people do take public transport methods, perhaps that employer needs to give that confidence to the employee that if they are a couple of minutes late, it's okay. I think there's a whole load of dynamics to come to play, and I'm sure that will come through more in some of the other topics around behaviour change. Well, for now, thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Lizzie. We've got through the first section. We're an hour and a half in, and as I say, my mind is still whirring away with all the stats. Can't wait to look again at the slides. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.